and author of Creating Parity. Please join me in welcoming him to the stage.
Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I've been asked to address you. We are off the schedule for exactly the reason which was just alluded to. We didn't know when this was going to be released, and it's with great relief that it was released in time for the Garma Festival. But can I just say, and I don't know if Noel's still in earshot, if I'm in any way seen as a father of this Creating Parity review, which I'd love you to get hold of a summary of if you can, then it's godparents. It's the spiritual guide, the counsellor, the person who saw this child grow to something which could eventually launch, was definitely on its mother's side, Marcia Langton, and certainly on the father's side, Noel Pearson. And it's been described, ladies and gentlemen, in various quarters as bold and brave and ambitious, and I think that's kind of white parochialism for a bit hard. But I do know that from the very first memories I had, I shared them with Indigenous brothers and sisters. I do know that the greatest honour I have had is to walk with them, the privilege of growing up with my Indigenous brothers and sisters, and the greatest tragedy I've had is seeing those family members of mine take to an early grave. And so it is with absolute determination that when I was approached by the Prime Minister to review employment and training practices to try and get to the nub of where the disparity might exist, there was going to be fierce determination in getting to the truth and uncovering the solutions and bringing them out to the Australian people. And then of course, as Prime Ministers do, they pass you a chalice occasionally. And he said, and I also want you to do welfare. And at that point, I said, no. There are so many other factors in play. There are so many other obstacles which prevent that great epiphany which I learned on the journey of memory and discovery of writing this review for you, that there is no disparity between an Australian or a first Australian with a half-decent education. And when a first Australian has that decent education or even goes on to university, then I happily admit that Indigenous women outperform participation in the workforce than their non-Indigenous sisters. So we know for sure, ladies and gentlemen, that this disparity can come to an end. And while it is my forebears and my sister's forebears who fought to have much greater recognition throughout the early years of this federation and to include indigeneity into the Constitution, maybe now 110 odd years it can be corrected. And I thank Noel for that great privilege that he gave us in allowing us to witness his speech. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not about a continuance, a definition of insanity, that we will achieve a different result by doing more of the same or perhaps a little tinkering around the edges. We must completely change. And I ask Shane and Bill and their parliamentary colleagues who are going to address you tomorrow morning and tomorrow afternoon as leaders of the opposition, I implore you all to remind them that when I spoke to Jenny Macklin, that towering intellect of determination to resolve the plight of Indigenous disparity, and could not get the support from her cabinet or the state governments or the communities for the resolutions which were common sense. I say the time has come for complete change. The time for action is now. And when The opposition leader speaks. In his heart, he will remember the agreement which Jenny Macklin and he made with me, that in my search for the answers and recognising that they would be entirely different due to the courage of the incumbent government to approach a hard-edged philanthropist and business person to review failing government policies, that they would know that I would be utterly scornful of practices which lead to the cash barbecue of billions of dollars of hard-earned wages through taxes and salaries, which has been wasted in our training systems and education systems, and that I would demand serious change. And when I presented this absolute reality to the opposition leader, he deferred to Jenny. And Jenny said, right, we will believe you, Andrew, but we impose 3 conditions on bilateral political support. And ladies and gentlemen, this bilateral political support is only possible if the mob, the people from Wonkajonka or Kununurra or Sydney or Adelaide or Darwin or wherever you are from, get behind it. You are our greatest lobby group. If you, the mob, support the 27 recommendations, knowing that the experts like Noel Pearce and others have said, well, implement these and you will destroy for all time and for all places in all our country the disparity. And we will walk tall, equal to our Australian brothers and sisters, not in assimilation, not parked somewhere like noble savages, but that twin highway which my sister Janie Malyuda grew up with. Proud cultural leaders of our station, of the stations of our region, who happily and comfortably presented themselves in traditional and English language, and when their commands were given in grace and intellect, we all followed black or white because they were leaders. And the alienation from that concept, which has since been wrought upon the Australian people to believe that you can be either one or the other and not, as Noel Pearson described, both. And so we must destroy that concept. We must remind our Prime Minister and our opposition leader that if there is no blunderbuss approach, say like Jenny described the Northern Territory intervention with no consultation of the Australian people, and if there is no offence to the Racial Discrimination Act, and finally the last condition of the opposition was that if these policies are good for vulnerable Indigenous Australians, then you must be brave enough, Forrest, to recommend them for all vulnerable Australians. And that is exactly what I have done. And so it is with the deepest of respect to the Yungal people, Gamaji, Galaroi, and the others who've asked me to dream of an Australia with no disparity, that I present to you just some of the simple ideas which can lead this country ably and rapidly out of the quicksand of the disparity and the welfare-led gap we have in so many places between our first Australians and other Australians. To just simply recognise and quickly, if you acknowledge that 350% of brain growth in a child is more important up to 3 years of age, from the 5 to 7% which happens after that to maximum brain growth, then you will put the small resource required to ensure that very vulnerable child is looked after so there is no disparity when that child enters school. When you do as we've done in Chalice Primary School, where we've gone in Armidale in Perth to the lowest socioeconomic areas of our state, and we have recognised that the discrepancy of lifestyles and of achievements and of outcomes called the disparity is not in indigeneity. It is from the sufferers of poverty, of poor government policy and worse implementation, of isolation, of the gentle bigotry or even soft racism, of low expectations. Then for Indigenous and non-Indigenous, you can see what can happen if you involve mums into schools even before birth. And that's what we've done at Chalice Primary School. Mums get visits when they register their pregnancy from someone from the school, a counsellor from the school, who looks up and sees the bottle of sherry half empty and explains exactly what FASD is. And that little child, when he or she is born, will perhaps not be your best friend for life, but a burden to your society and mostly to you. And when mum acknowledges that and goes to the school for further advice, not to a foreign institution in the city or somewhere, but to a school. And when little Barbara is born, she's taken to where the kids are playing. And when she's a toddler, she goes back to the little school and she can hear the sounds of play and of sport and of teaching and participation, particularly if it's direct and explicit instruction, which Noel has done so successfully and so has this school. Then she is dragging mum back because things aren't so great at home. This is a very poor and very vulnerable community. And she's dragging mum and dad back to that place they call school. And what's happened, instead of being at the lowest possible ranking of the NAPLAN entry, this school from the lowest socioeconomic region of Perth, with about 30% Indigenous and greater percentages of multiple incarceration, boat people who have got through all the rest of the underprivileged and vulnerable, this school is starting above the NAPLAN average for entry. These kids, these underprivileged kids. And then, of course, the NAPLAN average never catches up. These kids roar away. So we know that early childhood intervention absolutely works. And you go from there to education. You consider the other policies in the review. Yes, we've all heard that the Healthy Welfare Card, which is simply a debit card issued not by the government but by the normal Australian banking system, which has been through every chief executive of every bank, Coles, Woolworths, IGA, EFTPOS. I've gone to the very top and I've said, hang on. I don't want welfare quarantining, very poor briefing in that. I don't want income management. I simply want to help the most vulnerable people of our communities not be prey to the scourges of drugs, of alcohol and humbug if they don't want to be. And so out of that came a storm of controversy yesterday, which by the end of the day had appeared to be a groundswell of support. Out of that came a range of other policies. Out of that came a commitment by the top 200 companies of our land, the members of the BCA and others which were mentioned, of every state government to employ 4% Indigenous and 4% procurement from Indigenous companies. And before the bureaucrats pushed back and said, that'll never happen, do you realise, Andrew, the Commonwealth budget is $42 billion and you're talking about 1.4 billion to Indigenous companies? I said, yes, absolutely I am, mate. Fortescue Metals Group has achieved $1.6 billion to Indigenous companies, and we're just one company. So don't tell me this is impossible. We are a results-driven company. We have BHP and Rio Tinto breathing down our necks and would crush us if they could, if our results are worse than theirs. We have to have performance. We don't go to Indigenous companies because we're soft-hearted people. We go to them because they're good. And they bring a range of other advantages as well. There's other factors in there. We cannot expect the TAFE system or the government system to address extreme poverty and extreme resistance to training or employment where there has been very long-term incarceration, where there is severe drug addiction, where people are living out of the backseat of cars. And they take up a large percentage of the most disparate of our brothers and sisters, Indigenous and non-Indigenous. But I personally have had an Aboriginal person telling me on a Thursday night, "Brother, you must give me a job." And I've said, "Well, brother, will you go to training?" And they've said, "Absolutely." I said, "So it starts 8 o'clock Monday." He said, "Right, I'll be there." And I said, "So when you're not, because you are severely drug addicted or you don't believe in the system or you've been let down so many times by so many pointless training systems, when you're not, can I come to your home? Can I walk through your door? Can I go to your bed? And can I pull you out of it firmly like a caring brother or father and say, let's brush our teeth, get dressed and go to training?" And I've done that many times personally, and I've seen it done thousands of times, and it absolutely works, and it takes very few days to change someone's life in doing that. And these people now populate as supervisors and managers all through the hierarchy of Fortescue and other companies. And their faces are pockmarked and ravaged from heroin addiction or what happened in jail, and they are now leaders in our community and leaders in our company, and no one says to them, "I've done it really tough. I've got to feel sorry for me, so I'm going to take a day off tomorrow, I'm going to leave work at 3. No, they say, "Oh, mate, you haven't seen tough. Have you seen this scar here, mate? That's tough. That's what I got in prison." You're staying till 5 o'clock like everyone else because you're an Indigenous person and because we know you're good for it, and we're not copying those excuses which were widely derided here on this excellent panel. You can't expect the government to do that. They won't. But the private sector can, and the private sector has. So I've said to our Treasurer and to our finance ministers, give these companies total tax freedom. Make them powerful. Have investors come into them. Don't say they have to be 50% owned by their Aboriginal owners. If I had that at Fortescue Metals Group, I could never have got the place going, because you do need a plan B. Plan A often doesn't work. You slip and fall on your bum. You need a plan B. If you need to issue more shares or get great talent in, you need to be able to go down to less than 50%. Now, of interest to me is that we dropped that to 25%, but 80% of the Indigenous companies which we employ at Fortescue all have ownership above 50% because they didn't have to maintain it. They always had a plan B. And when the Treasurer or the Finance Minister said, "Hold the phone, look at the precedent danger of this," and I've said, "Well, please, these people are from streams 3 and 4. They have major challenges to training and employment. You're never going to get a bean of tax from these people. They're going to cost you, Mr. Finance Minister." I'll give you an example and we've spoken about the participation in jails, of our over-representation of our Indigenous brothers and sisters. From an incident, a serious incident, to the legal system, to incarceration, to counselling, and out again, there is no change to the taxpayer of $1 million. So don't tell me that we shouldn't give these companies complete tax freedom so we can drive Indigenous entrepreneurialism into this country and into our economy, and we can reach out as we should be judged in how we care for our least, most marginalised, our most vulnerable. And that is what has driven the Creating Parity review, a fierce and determined drive to end the disparity for all time. And that, ladies and gentlemen, if you would allow me to walk with you, I am very comfortable as your servant, handing over the review and leaving it to you. But if you invite me to walk with you, I will walk with you. I will be your servant. I, like you, completely believe in Australia with equality of outcome for all our peoples. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you to everybody who has attended today. And that concludes the program. Thank you very much, and hopefully see you tomorrow.